Hey guys, Luton here, back for Below the Line. This is a series I do on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We discuss issues in the gaming industry. You give your comments, I reply to them here. It's split into two parts. The first part is me discussing your comments that I've selected. The second part is me talking about an issue that you will then comment on down below. And then next time I pick out the best comments and we go around again. Now last time we were talking about, again, the issue of loot crates, loot boxes. It never seems to go away because it's ever present now. And I was talking about how it seems very likely that this is going to be a thing for the next Battlefield 2018. Like it or not, it seems like it's not going away. Those EA executives seem determined to implement this for us. So starting off with AK-47 Striker says he saw the title and it's his exact fear. If Battlefield goes this route, makes even vehicles pay to win unlocks something that are mechanically able to implement because we no longer enter into vehicles that we find on the battlefield, but we can spawn in them. I mean, obviously you can enter into them on the battlefield as well, but I know what he means. He means you don't sort of like go to them around the spawn area. That's what he means. If they even think of implementing that shit, I'm done with the franchise. I already ditched Halo 5 and Gears 4 for this invasive, penny-pinching microtransaction horseshit, and it seems like I'm on the road to being done with video games altogether. At least there's Red Dead Redemption 2. Yeah, but you know, who knows where that's going to go. No. We're going to be talking a little bit today about being done with games and single player towards the end. That's going to be sort of around my topic for today, so we'll come back to that. But again, you know, I think this is the thing. I wonder whether these guys at EA have really understood the implications of putting this stuff into the game. Now, we've seen it with Battlefront where they tried to backtrack and roll it back. Now, whether that's going to be enough of a shockwave to make them rethink things, I doubt it, because as we will talk about later on, you've only got to look at what's happening with Visceral, and if they're prepared to do that, they're probably prepared to do anything. Now, Levisco says, unless something is done and fast by gamers, it's likely going to be a second video game crash. I'm not quite sure where the first was, maybe refer me to that. Frequently look through the PlayStation Store, it's pretty much an orgy of the same shitty clones that manage to rake in fuck tons of cash by luring people with the just one time is okay, or this is going to take a little bit too long, a bit too expensive. He's talking about DLC microtransaction, that kind of crap. Until it turns into a drug addiction, and that's completely true. I've seen and heard about this from people over and over again, explaining like, hey, this happened to me. I ended up spending like £100, £200 more on this stuff. You get hooked into it. That's how this stuff works. And he says, granted, there are some good games where you actually don't have to spread open your wallet to have a good time, but if you've never bothered to dig, you'd think it's just a circle jerk of who's going to catch all those whales, dolphins, suck their wallets dry. It's disgusting. The fact that video games that you already fucking paid for have loot box and microtransactions in them is infuriating. Don't forget the excessive DLC that puts even story relevant content, or among others, behind a paywall, as well as premium, platinum, gold, whatever editions you've got to spend twice, if not more, the original games cost. That's true. I mean, often you see maybe the original game costs like 40 quid or whatever, but by the end of it you've paid something like 120, 130. It's bonkers. He says the fact that people are okay with this, and it went from it's okay, they need to make money somehow in free-to-play games, to games are expensive to make, so I guess it's okay in games you already paid for. And by the way, that is a disproven thing. There's some really good videos that I've been linked recently, which I'll note down below, you should go check out, which basically show the numbers up that are publicly available, and it is not the case. It is not the case. Games are expensive to make, but they're not so expensive to make that they can't recoup their costs and have to put in this other BS. Make no mistake, okay? Microtransactions and that kind of crap, loot boxes, all that sort of nonsense, it's about expanding the profit margins, and it's not about game maintenance either. It's not about like supporting servers and all this kind of crap. That's factored in, all right? It's not like people buying DLCs is required to sustain the game. It's just not. He says, now we're here. The only thing I can think of is vote with your wallet, encourage people not to buy AAA games or X editions, spend money on microtransactions when they're blatant cash sinks. More people are seeing this shit show for how disgusting and harmful to the industry it is. So there's hope gaming can recover, but considering there are a lot of people that are fine with this, I wouldn't put my hopes up. But you know, again, this is what we've been talking about. As I've been saying, I don't think even that more than just having a conversation, we need to really do anything, because beyond that, what are you actively going to do? You know, what really are you actively going to do? My hope is that just through the visibility and constant discussion, that will eventually spread over time, and yeah, it should feed through eventually, is my hope. Okay, next up, Durzel, who says, loot boxes in the next Battlefield, isn't that what battle packs are? Okay, before we come to the rest, yes, battle packs obviously are something that you could purchase. However, battle packs don't have really any true implication on the game. That's not what we're talking about. Yes, if you want to be literal, then yes, it is a sort of a loot box of a kind, but it's not really what we're talking about. And as I have highlighted before, I originally used to say, because this is always the line that gets trotted out, okay? It always gets trotted out where people say, oh, it's okay, it's just cosmetics, it's just cosmetics, it's just cosmetics. I know many people, okay, that have messaged me and contacted me and that I've even spoken to who say things like, yeah, I've spent like 50 quid, I've spent like £100 or more on just cosmetic loot boxes. Speaking to people that I know through Overwatch who've done this and all these kind of things. And it's like, you see, the issue is it's not so much about literally whether those things affect a game or whatever, but it's about the gradual normalization of it. Right, that's the thing. Remember how people used to even be outraged sometimes by games being split into DLC? Well, now that's not even anything that people bat an eyelid at. So this is the issue, is that if you normalize the idea of loot crates and loot boxes being in a game for cosmetic items only, and this is something which I've come around to thinking, it's not like what I thought originally, so this is something I originally was fine with, and I was like, yeah, that's fine, yeah, have cosmetic loot boxes, why not? Don't have loot boxes. If you're going to do cosmetic things, right, just put a price on it. If you want to do that, right, if you want to do the idea of purchasing things, but you see, even then, that's a slippery slope. Because if you, I mean, talking about slippery slopes, I can think of some other things in the news where people use that analogy. But it's like, you know, it's true. If you start to say, like, in a game, like, hey, I'm not talking about a DLC where it's like a pack of goods, right? I do think that is okay. I think we can handle that. But the idea that you might say, like, oh, hey, this guy's outfit, well, that costs you like 5 quid. You know, this guy's got an elite outfit or whatever, that's going to cost you a tenner. Whatever, this special gun, whatever. You know, if you break it down like that, you're not gambling, but it still is encouraging them to deliver games where they segment and compartmentalize the content, and then you have to then pay subsidiary prices on top of that, which, again, it's just a bad road to go down, because where is that going to end? But when it comes to loot boxes and loot crates, yeah, if you start to have cosmetic things, I can see now how that's really bad because of where it started to go. And it's actually really distasteful when you think about it, where they sort of make you feel like, oh yeah, it's okay, don't worry, it's just cosmetic. And you think, oh, okay, well, I can handle that. And then look where it ends up, look where we are now, where they're actually talking about, and look, let's be real, like with the Battlefront 2 stuff, I even would say it's not worst case scenario with the Battlefront 2 boxes, the way they were talking about having it. It's still soft-ish to a degree, right? It's a step down that path that we really shouldn't be going down. So I would also say that the battle packs as they exist right now, that in and of itself is a terrible, terrible thing. Anyway, back to the comments. So Durzel, honestly, I'd be more surprised if they weren't included, talking about battle packs and all that kind of stuff. Battlefield is only a husk of what it once was, having been slowly eaten away by drooling masses crying for more, and the greed of EA being all too willing to accommodate them. Honestly, Battlefield has had so much crap added to it, and so many changes have been made to make it more accessible that the series is no longer Battlefield. I can see where you're coming from, but I think there's like an interpretation to be had there that some people will probably disagree with. But anyway, they put so much focus into making the look and sound appealing that they've forgotten what the game is about and why it was fun. Frankly, I'm only playing BF4 because it's all I have while I look for a game that captures the true magic of the older BFs, namely slower player movement to encourage a more tactical approach and fewer but much more meaningful guns. Now, those two are for me the linchpin. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent here because it's not the topic, but I do think that pace and the specific characteristics of weapons are probably the core elements of what is lost with Battlefield now. You know, there's so many weapons, and there were through BF4 though. I mean, everybody keeps talking BF4. There's even a lot of weapons in BF3. You compare it back to like Bad Company and Battlefield 2, you see a greater variety of weapons here. And I actually don't think that's a terrible thing in and of itself. The most important thing is just to ensure that those weapons are not being added for the sake of being added, and that they're being added to give like different characteristics to fill in roles that don't exist, or to maybe expand the play styles of players. But if they're just being thrown in because it's kind of like a requirement, here's the thing, when you think of the way the game is structured, you know, it's like when you have those DLCs or what have you, they essentially have to come up with weapons to throw in there. And, there's other things I could go down that route, but like I say, it's off topic a little, so let's crack on. So it's AMC Jammy Dodger. Battlefield has already got a loot crate system. We've gone over this, battle packs. Got no issue if Battlefield 2018 had the same battle pack system that's in BF1, as they only include weapon, vehicle skins and melee weapons. Now, as I say, I don't think that's actually a good thing for the reasons I stated. He says if they go down Battlefront 2's route though, then I still won't mind too much, as long as all weapons and gadgets can still be unlocked through normal progression. This would be still better than a season pass. Now, that's sort of an interesting perspective. He says if the only way to unlock everything is through loot crates, however, then I would be annoyed. But I don't have an issue if others want to spend money to unlock weapons if I can still unlock them normally. It's when all progression is based on random number generators, I think, is what will cause an issue for me. So I don't have an issue with loot crates being in Battlefield as long as they're accompanied by good progression and the season pass is dropped. Now, you guys know how much I hate season passes, but it's probably worth me restating where I am on season passes just for the sake of it. And it's like, season passes, they're not terrible in and of themselves. It's just the execution and the general concept which is fundamentally flawed. The idea of, hey, you can buy something to support the game throughout a year and maybe you get it a little bit cheaper, that's pretty good, because if they're going to put out that content anyway, and it's a game that you like anyway, this is where I was when Premium originally came out in Battlefield. I was like, well, I know for a fact I'm going to get this, so why wouldn't I buy it for a little bit cheaper, right? But here's the thing with that. The issue is that, as we saw with Hardline, the game tanked hard, and then there was no player base. And the issue then, of course, is you've thrown your money away. Now, before that time, it had been fairly consistent that you release a game, player base sticks around for the game, and that's why they sort of decided to implement this system, I'm sure. And we'd started to see this in other games coming along at the same time. Until that failed and you had a game which really just died off the face of the earth, it wasn't until then that you sort of start to question it and realize, like, oh, hey, actually, this is a really, really terrible idea, and it's a really flawed concept. And that's why I say now, season passes should just not be a thing. Season passes, premium, call it whatever you will. The idea of purchasing a year's worth of content when you don't even know whether a player base will exist for that content is fundamentally flawed. And I think it would actually be pretty respectful for publishers and developers, if they're self-published, to sort of stand up and acknowledge that and go, hey, we can see that this concept doesn't work, but of course they're not going to do that. But you should be aware of it as a consumer, that you're basically buying content that you have no idea whether there's going to be people to play it for. And this has been an issue. It has been an issue. Other producers have talked about this with some Battlefield titles, where it was like, well, hey, this DLC's out, I like the maps, it's cool content, but there's no one here and there's no one playing. Because, the game has just hemorrhaged players and died off. And that's really where this kind of thing comes to. It's about putting out content. It's about putting out the base game content and giving people what they want. If the base content, the way in which the game plays itself, is not good, then all of the other stuff on that is just wasted and subsidiary content, which is essentially, at the end of the day, meaningless, and you could just be throwing your money away. So in and of itself, right, when you really think about it, season passes and premium and that kind of crap are actually even a form of kind of like a loot crate gambling, because you don't know. You don't know what you're going to get. If you buy a multiplayer game, right, you buy a full price multiplayer game, when you get that game, you know, because it is coming out, there will be a player base for that game for some time. Now look, if after, like, say 3 to 4 to 5 months that player base drops off, you've got 3 or 4, 5 months content out of that initial purchase price. I would argue that probably covers your purchase price. But if you have purchased basically that entire game again on top of that, all right, and then you don't even know whether there's going to be a player base there, you're rolling the dice. Because you how do you know? How do you know? You're gambling. You're gambling as to whether or not that player base. You're saying, well, I hope the player base is going to be there, but I don't know. Because I don't know, because I haven't played this game. And even if you wait a couple of weeks or a month, you still won't know, because often you see that. And that's when you come to things like player retention as well of a game. It's like players coming in and out, that affects the experience. Maybe they jump in, they find a bad experience. That's actually, player retention is something I want to talk about separately. But anyway, so that's kind of where I am with some of these loot boxes. Now, I thought it was interesting what Dodger was saying, though, about how he doesn't mind if things are able to be unlocked through boxes, providing you can unlock it in the base game. I would say I can see that, I can understand that point of view, but it does depend a bit on how prohibitively difficult they make it to unlock that stuff. Have they made it a deliberate grind, a deliberate pain in the ass to unlock that thing? If so, then yeah, that's a pain in the ass. But essentially, think about this, right? Why would you want to have a loot box system? All right, because what you're essentially saying there, right? You're saying, well, I don't mind if the guns and content are in the game, but just in the form of boxes that you have to get, right? Why would you advocate that when we have already seen in the past stuff like shortcut bundles for Battlefield, right? And I actually, to a point, and I say this loosely, to a point, I don't mind it. I'm probably going to regret saying that, but and the reason is the idea with the shortcut bundle was it doesn't come out at release. A shortcut bundle typically might come out like 3 months down the line, 4 months down the line, something like that. And the idea with the shortcut bundle is it unlocks like a pack of guns, a pack of gear or gadgets, whatever. And that was because for people that really do like playing the game, but maybe they've got, a lot of work and they just want to jump in now and again. They got a family, they don't have the time to sit and grind. They just want to unlock stuff. And I was like, you know what? Like the gaming audience, the gaming player base for some of these games is getting older. It's like I'm over 30 now as well, and it's like, yeah, so the gaming audience moves on, people's lives change, and I can understand the necessity of maybe having some of those kind of things in there. However, as I say, why would you want something like loot crates over a system like that? Because essentially it's the same thing if what you're saying is you don't mind stuff just being able to be unlocked. Why would you want boxes where you might not get that, as opposed to a system where you just know straight up front exactly what you're getting? Surely that is the better system to go down. Okay, last up, Rob, great comment. In 2016, the EA CFO said, "We've been a leader in driving digital extra content for games, which really drives the profitability of this business." For the fiscal year of 2017, EA made $1.68 billion on digital content outside of full game downloads. That is 140 million a month, or nearly 5 million a day, and sales continue to increase year after year. It's safe to say paid post-launch digital content is here to stay. It's too profitable not to be. And with the trend towards doing away with paid map packs, which split the community up, and they do, it seems inevitable that Battlefield 2018 will experience an increase in microtransactions and battle packs. I think they'll try to follow the same route as Battlefront 2 and make crates less about aesthetics and more about gameplay, which is true. They'll probably do that to make it more essential, make people feel pressured more to actually have to get this stuff. He says, I don't think they're making enough money selling battle packs with only skins, right? And I'm absolutely sure that is the case. He says another thing to consider is that about half of that $1.68 billion is from the Ultimate Team feature of sports games like FIFA, where you can purchase packs of player cards and then use those players on your Ultimate Team in online play. There are different rarities for cards where the rarest gold card gives you the best stats for that player. These card packs can be earned in-game, but as I was referring to earlier on, they take forever to grind. Now look at Battlefront 2. You can grind for or purchase star cards that give you abilities and equipment in online play. They come in different rarities, where the rarest star card gives you the best stats for your abilities and equipment. It's almost as if EA is trying to reproduce their most profitable microtransaction features in other games. Obviously. Battlefield 2018 has a lot going against it. It's tough to see EA making any major changes within the next year. Battlefield 3 Premium came out in 2011. It's taken 6 years for them to finally do away with season passes. I wonder if it will take that long for these damned loot crates to go away too. And that is a sobering thought. The only positive is that we've already seen the outcry around the Battlefront 2. In that sense, if they were to do it with Battlefield, which still I think does have a pretty strong core audience, if they were to throw in microtransactions hard on Battlefield, or even soft to a point with the weapons and stuff, I think people would lose their shit, and I know I would. I probably wouldn't stop talking about it for a long time, and I'd probably try and make things as difficult as I could for them, and I'd probably even be calling out people if they were promoting it. I always say it's not a good idea to call people out, and I still think that's the case, but I think if you start to see YouTube producers like hopping on the bandwagon of like shouting the odds for loot boxes in Battlefield, and if they actually contain weapons and stuff, I think it's time to take the gloves off and actually start calling those people out. And it would be up to as well the player base to get on board with that and actually say, like, you can't be on board with this. It's bullshit. It damages the game. It damages the community. It damages games in general beyond that single game. So I think that kind of behavior from YouTube producers or Twitch streamers or whatever, in my opinion, totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. But as I say, we're not there yet, but it's a sobering prospect that that's where we're headed into in 2018. So now we come to the part of this episode where I pose a new topic for you guys to think about, discuss down in the comments below, and then in the next video I'll pick out your comments from today and we'll go through them as we just have. So this week's topic for Below the Line is a conversation that's been whirling around not just this week but for a few years, that of the death of single player games. This idea that single player games are dying off and that multiplayer games are taking over. Now, you don't have to look far to see various videos and topics going around the games mill this last week, largely triggered by that death of Visceral Gaming and the killing of its single player Star Wars experience, coupled with EA executives talking about pivoting away from a single player experience. And again, I know I'm on the EA bandwagon a little bit lately, but I can't help it if they keep throwing stuff up there, right? Even a little research, if you just go online, Google a little bit about death of single player games, you're going to find this isn't a new thing. This has actually been trying to move away in this sense for a little time now. And I actually found a piece from a year ago from a then EA executive saying, I volunteer you to speak to EA studio heads. They'll tell you the same thing. They're very comfortable moving the discussion towards how we could make connected gameplay, be it cooperative or multiplayer or online services, as opposed to fire and forget packaged goods, only single player, 25 hours and you're out. I think that model is finished. Now that's from EA executive back in 2015. So it's a little while ago. And it shows you how they're still thinking about this now. This idea of pushing away from single consumed content, which you sort of play through once or twice and then you're done with it. This idea of creating more consistent content, which lasts for longer. But why? Now, when it comes to the death of Visceral recently, many people couldn't understand this, and I think it was written off as just the kind of corporate throat cutting that happens when a big publisher like EA decides that the numbers don't add up. On closer inspection though, you start to see that, as I said, this is part of a trend of AAA publishers leaning to try and promote the dying breaths of single player games, directing people towards more experience-based adventures that might not be single player but can be enjoyed as single or multiplayer, all the while keeping those most important elements relevant, that in-game transactions and 2017's ever-spreading pandemic of loot crate gambling. Essentially, big publishers are making a shimmy to the side, not killing off single player, but there's plenty of talk about how it has to change toward a different focus, which of course is total bullshit. Now again, recently EA executive Patrick Söderlund stated that, in reference to the Visceral Star Wars game, he said, in its current form it was shaping up to be a story-based, linear adventure game. Throughout the development process, we were testing the game concept with players and listening to their feedback about what and how they want to play and closely tracking fundamental shifts in the marketplace. What does that mean? He says it's become clear that to deliver an experience that players will want to come back to, okay, and enjoy for a long time to come, we needed to pivot the design. And this is where people are talking about this kind of death of single player games, because if you break that down, it has become clear that to deliver an experience that players will want to come back to, well, that doesn't mean, and then he goes on to say, and enjoy for a long time to come, which is kind of like sort of validating what has just been said there. If you're saying it's become clear to deliver an experience players want to come back to, what that's talking about is making the game something which is addictive. It makes it something that you want to come back into, you feel pulled to come back into, and then you tag on, oh, and enjoy it for a long time to come. But that's subjective. And then saying, well, we needed to pivot the design because we realized, hey, they were just making a single player game, not the kind of single player game we wanted them to make. So why this push from the big guys towards more open world experiences, that kind of idea of a consistent running title? And in EA's words, after shutting down Visceral, a pivot in their focus to deliver a different experience that their audience apparently wanted that no one wanted. The answer, and I know this is going to be a shock for you, it's money. Yeah. As I said, I know that's going to be a big revelation for you. When you think back to, let's just horribly generalize and say most single player experiences, probably one of my worst generalizations, but being very generous, how many hours are you going to plow into kind of your average single player experience of a game, right? Dependent on that title, it's going to range anywhere from as little as maybe 6, if you think like something like Firewatch, 4 to 6 hours Firewatch, up to maybe 50, even 100 hours into a game if it's got replay value and secrets to unlock. If it's like an RPG but single player, you might bang 100 hours into it, maybe even a bit more. If it's a mainly narrative focused game, it's going to be lower on that end. Regardless though, that playtime is going to pale compared to what are now being termed forever games. And that's referring to games that are usually in the category of kind of open world RPG MMO games, the kind of games which are just permanently updated, that usually can be a single player and a cooperative game respectively. You can kind of play it any which way. The obvious ones are things to look at are stuff like Destiny a bit, classics like WoW, you could probably rattle off a few others. I guess to a degree, you could lump in even large FPS titles, I think. Basically anything that's got a significant amount of repeatable gameplay. And you can see why that would be a core focus for big publishers, because they want to keep getting money out of their product. They're not interested in delivering a really polished big single player title now, only how much money they can extract from the player base after they make that initial big marketing push around release, because that's going to be that peak time for sale. After that, it's all downhill, and the only way they're going to continue to rake it in is through these microtransactions, essentially like mining the community. In order to make that happen, they're going to need to create titles that require grinding and long-term engagement over at least a 12-month period, but probably beyond. Things that are typically absent in single-player titles. And all of that is to enable the kind of microtransaction loot box stuff that we keep talking about, things that are typically absent in single-player titles because there's no requirement for it. And there's a diminishing list of big developers working on primarily single-player focused content now, and that sort of AAA end of things. Bethesda, Naughty Dog, there's others, but those are the first ones that jump into my mind. Look at the recent offerings we've had currently, stuff like, just recently Wolfenstein, Assassin's Creed Origins, both those games gaining a lot of traction with gamers. So it's, those games are all over the place right now. It's not as if people don't want to play that content. This idea that it's dying away somehow is just a complete fiction. The death of single-player games is exaggerated, but it's not totally false. It's just that it's more of an interpretation. It would be more true to say that we're seeing the deliberate death of AAA single-player games. And honestly, it's probably no bad thing. I think if anything, what we might do is see the resurgence of those kind of mid-level developers. For quite a while it seemed like we were only kind of having big AAAs and then more sort of indie stuff, and now when you start to see some good successes with things like Senua's Sacrifice, even stuff like Cuphead, you might have missed things like Rime this year, Snake Pass. Rime and Snake Pass I would say more on the kind of indie, not so much mid-level, but those things are probably going to get propelled forward because they've done very well. Think of massively popular RPG stuff like Stardew Valley. We see devs as well crowdfunding more and more. Even big devs like Frontier are producing Planet Coaster and Elite Dangerous self-published. So it's worth remembering games as well like Total War, which, while admittedly having plenty of multiplayer action, contains a real wealth of single player, and they don't work on actively exploiting you in the process. Games like Total War, they got the classic DLC setup, but they don't try to fuck you over all the way through the game. Now, some of you guys have said to me on the series before, hey LT, nothing's going to change. We talk about things in the AAA sphere, but we can't do anything, it's too big. Well look, that's where you're wrong. Because it's all about us, it's all about community, it's all about conversation, it's all about spreading the word and leading by example. And I believe it's that drip, drip, drip. It's not going to change tomorrow, but I think over time it's going to have to change. Take a look at titles. This is what you need to do. Take a look at titles made by these medium level devs. Explore, get out there, look at indie games, reach outside your normal game playing space. By supporting and taking an interest in single player titles outside of just one or two big multiplayer experiences, you might be surprised at how much enjoyment you can get, as well as how impressive some of these studios' games are often with a very small team producing them. Did somebody say RimWorld? One of the most addictive, most enjoyable games I've played for a long time, which is sold like at a ridiculously cheap price and is still massive fun. You know, it's like, and then you got to look at the modding scene and all this kind of stuff. I think AAA publishers stepping away from crafted single-player games just so they can work out how best to extract gold from their audience is misguided, and it's ultimately only going to further cement people's cynicism and continue to damage them in the long term. Meanwhile, indie and mid-level devs seem to be just having a boon lately with loads of successful games, more on the way. Again, look at stuff like Cuphead recently, how popular that has been and how great of a game that's been. So guys, tell me in the comments about your experiences with single player games at any level. Specifically though, have you been or are becoming turned off by the way that you are treated by large publishers? I'm pretty certain that's the case, but if you've got anything to talk about around this idea of single player titles, or the way in which these big publishers are actively trying to shift the focus of players towards these kind of big world open games just so they can monetize it and mine the shit out of your money, you know, interested to hear some thoughts about that. So back on Thursday guys, another Below the Line. Thanks for watching as always. If you enjoyed this series guys, please drop a like, it helps me out a ton. Drop a comment down below. I'll see you next time.